are on the record at 1:47 p.m. The date today is May 15, 2017. This marks the beginning of disc number 1 of the video retirement log of attorney Jude T. Lenahan, taken on behalf of the Tennessee Bar Association. This video retirement log is being held at Gullett, Sanford, Robinson, and Martin, PLLC, 150 3rd Avenue South, Suite 1700, Nashville, Tennessee, 37201. My name is Heather Watkins with Franklin Pro Video Services located in Franklin, Tennessee. I am the legal videographer. Will everyone please introduce yourselves for the record?
I'm Frank Grace, and I'll be asking the questions of Mr. Lenahan today.
I'm Jude Lenahan.
You may now proceed with the video retirement log.
Okay. Jude, custom being what it is, could you state your full name and date of birth, please?
Sure. It's Jude Thaddeus Lenahan, Sr., and I was born December 21st, 1944.
And one of the reasons we're having this conversation today is that you've practiced law here in Nashville, Tennessee for many years.
I have, over 50.
And I believe you're from Nashville, Tennessee originally.
Well, originally, I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana when my father was in the service. I lived in Louisville for 10 years. He was the oldest of 13 kids, big Irish family. And we moved to Nashville when I was 10. But I grew up here, and I always think of Nashville as my home. I lived out in Donaldson, went to Father Ryan.
When time came to go to college, where did you, what options did you consider?
Well, really, the only option I considered was Notre Dame. I just wanted to go there. And actually, I went there sight unseen. I rode up with a classmate and his parents because he was going there. And it turned out to change my life. It meant everything to me.
What year was that you started there?
I started in '62.
Were the interstates finished all the way up there?
No, they were just starting. There was that short stretch of about 45 miles south of Louisville that was a toll road. I-24 was just a muddy track because I used to go squirrel hunting and frog gigging out there with a friend of mine that had a four-wheel drive vehicle. So, and I got back and forth most times by hitchhiking.
And you did all 4 years at Notre Dame?
Yes.
And finished when, in '66?
Graduated in '66.
While you were at Notre Dame, what did you major in?
Well, I started out in engineering, but I just didn't think that way. And I switched majors to liberal arts and got a degree in English.
Okay. While you were there, did you engage in any hobbies or sports, athletics?
Yes, I was looking for a sport. When I first started Notre Dame, I was not very big, and Irish people seem to grow a little later in life. And I was only 17, first of all, and so I was looking for a sport where size didn't matter. I chose boxing. It just happened that Notre Dame had a great boxing program that dated back to the days of Newt Rockne in 29 and 30. And Dominic Napolitano, the coach, was in charge of all non-varsity athletics. He was the athletic director for non-varsity sports. And it turned out he was my mentor. I ended up with a free place to stay the last 2 years I was there, and access to a lot of free things. I got to sell programs on Saturday for football, which is a big cash cow, especially because my roommate John and I, he was also a boxer, we got to stand at the bus stop where all the tour buses let off hundreds of people. So we'd sell our programs in about 30 or 40 minutes, make $300 each or something like that, which was a lot of money.
Good money in the early 60s.
But, and we lived free the last couple of years. And John, my roommate, and I are still close friends. He became a doctor at the Mayo Clinic, and he lives in the mountains of West Virginia now and runs a clinic. And the other 3 guys we work with all 5 of us worked together all 4 years. We all became real close, and we still see each other.
As graduation approached in '66, what kind of career options were you looking at or did you consider at that point?
Well, I really thought about teaching. Two of my sisters and my little brother are all teachers. And I valued the education I'd gotten so far, which was good. But it was sort of a scheme of my former mother-in-law that got me going to law school. She had been in law school at University of Wisconsin, and her husband, who was a doctor, got killed in France. And so she had to drop out of school, and she never got to go back. And she kind of pointed me in that direction. And my boxing coach, Nappy, at Notre Dame, he tried to get me a full-time job in the athletic department so I could go to Notre Dame to law school. But that didn't work out. And I applied to Vanderbilt and to Columbia. But I don't know why I applied to Columbia, because at the time I'd never been in a big city except Chicago, and I couldn't see myself in New York exactly. And so I ended up at Vanderbilt, and it was a great choice. I'm real happy with the law school.
So did you start law school right after graduating, the fall after your graduation from?
Yeah, I had to. I was paying for it, and I couldn't like take a year or two off. It would have probably been good. I might have been a little more mature. But I carried a paper out morning and afternoon, and worked in the Xerox room at the law school, and on Sundays I'd sell shorefront property up at Lake Barkley. So I was always running around working.
How did your grades fare with all that working that you were doing?
Well, at first, my grades were just very average. That was partly because I did not have when I switched majors in college, I had only one elective in order to graduate on time. And so there were a lot of courses like history and civic related and things that I didn't take. I didn't have any kind of legal background. And so it just so happened that there were certain professors that were sort of egotistical, and they wanted their Xerox work done first.
You were working in a Xerox room or a copy room?
Worked in the Xerox room and making copies, whatever was put there, whatever I was doing. The complicated jobs, I'd run up to the main building and give them to the lady that ran the university department. But there were certain professors that somehow, when I got their work, my grades went up to dean's list. So that just all kind of worked out pretty well.
When you got ready to finish, when you approached graduation from law school, where did you look to maybe start your practice or start the practice of law?
Well, that really had started about halfway through law school. I was looking for a clerking job, but I could only work from like 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon because of the paper routes. At that time, you made a certain amount for each paper that you distributed or put in a rack, and so it was a substantial amount of income for me at that time. And none of the large firms would hire me. And so a guy I knew in Donaldson who was an investment broker, he said, well, talk to my lawyer. I think he's good. I use him, and he's busy all the time. I mean, he could probably use somebody. So that's when I contacted Joe Haynes, who had just started his practice a few years before that out in North Nashville on Buchanan Street. And I clerked there for a year and a half, and then I stayed there for 5 years. Jim Smith came on board sometime right around when I was about to finish that clerkship. And they had another office in Goodlettsville, and we had the North Nashville office.
Now, Joe Haynes became Senator Joe Haynes from Goodlettsville.
That's right, and his wife became Judge Barbara Haynes.
Was she a lawyer at that time, or?
No, she became a lawyer about the 3rd year I was at Joe's firm.
Okay. At some point I think you indicated that you moved on from the Haynes law firm to someplace else.
Well, there were several reasons, but the main reason was I wanted to try jury cases, and I wasn't getting that opportunity. I did have a couple of small civil jury trials, but mostly it was general sessions work all over Middle Tennessee, and I wanted some trial experience. So I had friends like Bobby Schwartz, my law school classmate, and others in the DA's office, and so I went to Tom Shriver, and I spent the middle part of the 70s there just trying felony cases, and it was just what I wanted. It gave me a tremendous amount of experience.
And Tom Shriver was the DA, district attorney in the middle 60s.
That's correct, yeah.
Who else did you work with in the district attorney's office?
Well, I worked with Roger May, Hal McDonough, some excellent prosecutors, Doug Thorson, who I later worked with in the federal defender office, Roger Fish, just, I can hardly remember all of them, but they were all good attorneys. The thing about Tom Shriver was he had had a horrible 67-day murder case way back when, and he had a very worthy adversary, and the case went on forever, and it just burned Tom out. And he didn't like to try any cases in criminal court after that, so he pretty much turned it over to us, and he always had our backs. He always took care of us, because obviously you get complaints, and he'd always back you up. But we went to court, and we had total discretion to do what we wanted to.
When you started the DA's office, you had spent some time in the general sessions misdemeanor docket, or did you start right up on the 6th floor?
Well, the deal I had, because I had a lot of experience, is I would only do the general sessions docket when maybe guys were on summer vacation for maybe a week at a time or something. And I was assigned immediately to criminal court, and that's where I wanted to be. And at first in front of Judge Leathers.
Is that Raymond Leathers?
Raymond Leathers, and then eventually in front of the other judges also. We had a little bit of difficulty caused by one of the assistants, because it turned out he was forum shopping. He would steer cases, serious cases, headline cases, to his court so he could get the publicity. And when that came to light, we were assigned to each court, and that's where we stayed for at least 6 months to a year at a time.
So one of the assistant DAs was steering cases to the court that he was practicing in?
Yeah.
And then so you guys, the assistants got...
Well, once you were put into court, I mean, you might move eventually, but I practiced in front of 3 judges in about a year each.
So that mean, you mentioned Raymond Leathers, John Draper, the other one, and...
John Draper and A.A. Birch.
Was Alan Cornelius still on the bench at that time, or had he moved?
Who?
Alan Cornelius.
No, I did have some cases in front of him. He was quite an excellent judge. I liked him, but I think I didn't do a lot in front of him. He must have been on his way to retirement when I first started in there.
Do you recall any interesting prosecutions while you were there?
Oh, yeah, there were some really interesting ones, but the one that actually has been part of my life, and it still is, involved a guy named Carl Carlson. Carl and his 5 cohorts were from New Jersey, and they were into a lot of drugs, and they came to Nashville, and what resulted eventually was a $400,000 jewel robbery in Green Hills. But Carl was represented by Bobby Schwartz, one of my law school classmates at Vanderbilt. And Bobby told him that I went to Notre Dame, and he was what we call a subway alum. He loved Notre Dame. And so when he found that out, he was a real outgoing guy. And every day in the courtroom, when he'd leave, he'd say, "See you, Notre Dame." And this was a serious case that lasted for about a week and a half or two. And eventually he got 15 years. And he would have gotten more. I asked for 25, but I left this lady on the jury, and I forgot I left her on there, and just until I told the court, "The jury's acceptable, Your Honor," as I was sitting down, and now out of the corner of my eye I saw her, and she held the verdict down. Well, several years later, I went to a Vanderbilt homecoming football game, just thinking I would see some of my friends there. And I went down the restroom. At the time, Vanderbilt just had these big troughs in the men's restroom. So I went in there, and I'm standing there, and there's a guy next to me that's a little bit bigger, and he said, "Hey, Notre Dame." And I turned around, and I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I really was a little more emphatic than that. I said, "What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be in prison." He said, "I got a furlough." So we talked a little bit, and we kept some contact. We'd see each other every once in a while and have a couple beers or talk. And it turned out that he'd done everything right. One of the few defendants I know of. He got out. He married a really nice lady. Graduated from Trevecca Nazarene College. Had 4 boys, and he started a program that was through the YMCA, an outreach program to try to reach kids and keep them from getting in the system or staying in the system. It was a very good program. But after 9 years, he got kind of burned out. So he started a program called Men of Valor, which is quite a unique program. And the goal is to cut down recidivism in the prison system, to help the guys that are getting out to find a place to live, to find a job, to get some emotional help or whatever they might need. And it's all privately funded. And Carl is a church guy. He credited his faith with getting him through the ministry, the prison and out. And he knew I wasn't like that, but we just hit it off as people. So the program was very successful. He funded it totally with private collections. And this huge, wealthy church out in Brentwood funds a whole lot of it. And they have fundraisers, and he has some real big hitters that donate. And it's been a really successful program. They're now building triplexes out in this kind of semi-abandoned property out by the airport on the far side of Donaldson. And they've built several, and he just done an incredible job for other people. But he passed away last year. But a couple of funny, and he wrote a nice little book, and he was nice enough to mention me among other people in the thankful kind of thing you always find in books, people that helped him and so forth. But it's quite a success story for Carl Carlson.
I understand when he would introduce you sometimes to these groups, the fundraisers and whatnot.
Oh yeah. This happened a couple times, but the first time when I went to this huge fundraiser at this Baptist church, and Carl asked me to stand up, and he told people that I'm the guy that put him in prison. And in between some of the speeches and mingling with the crowd, he would introduce me to all these boys and introduce me to some of these contributors. And he would always tell them that I'm the guy that wanted to put him in prison for 60 years, but he only got 15. So I pulled him aside the first time he said that. I said, Carl, I said, I asked for 25, not 60, and you only got 15. And I said, but, you know, it's your story, so you can tell it however you want to tell it. Between us, I didn't ask for any 60 years.
How long did you stay at the DA's office?
Just 3 years. I mean, I loved it. It was what I liked, and, you know, like I said, you had almost complete autonomy because Tom Shriver didn't look over your shoulder, and people complained. He'd back you up. One of the ironic things is I never got any death threats in the DA's office. I mean, I had a few angry defendants jump up and say something in court, like curse or something, but in my divorce practice, I had 3 different cases where I got death threats, which, I don't know, it kind of struck me as unusual, but if you ever try those cases, you can sort of understand why.
When you left the DA's office, where did you go?
Well, at first, I went to Butler, and Entrekin, which is always been a good firm, and the individuals were great lawyers.
Let's break that down. The Butler,
Well,
and Entrekin, that was...
there was Jack Butler, and of course, of counsel was Howard Butler, his father, who had been the Davidson County prosecutor in the past. He was much older. And he really was the kindest one because he had clients, good clients, that he just didn't feel like he could keep on representing them, and he had plenty. So he gave me some good clients, like Hot Stop Markets, who had maybe 30 locations in Nashville and were constantly needing a buffer, some lawyer to run a buffer with the beer board or just different, you know, suppliers and all that. So Howard really shared his caseload. But everybody else, you know, we were on the 26th floor of the high-rise, and it was expensive up there. And Tom White and Irvin Entrekin, they had a partnership, but we weren't we were on our own. It was just too much overhead for a single practitioner to deal with. So I left there and I went to George Barrett's firm.
Now, George Barrett been interviewed in this part of this program, and he recently passed away, and he's known as kind of a civil rights lawyer and a political operative, and also known as Citizen Barrett. So his life has been covered. I want to talk about somebody else.
Okay,
and
sure.
You mentioned Charlie Ray.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
That was really the main reason I went to practice with George. The name of the firm was Barrett, Lenahan, Niffen, and Ray.
Now, let me interrupt you.
Barrett, Ray, Niffen, and Lenahan. I can't even remember the whole name of the firm, but Charlie Ray was a top-notch lawyer and a close friend of mine.
Let me stop you right
Okay.
there to clarify. There are 2 Charlie Rays that practice in Nashville. One is Charlie R.A.W. we're talking about, and the other Charlie Ray is W.R.A.Y. with Bass, Berry, and Sims. We're talking about R.A.Y.
Right. I never think about that, but yeah, I knew the other Charlie Ray also. But his practice was totally different than ours. And we did a lot of different cases, but the big cases we handled were all criminal cases. And Charlie only handled criminal cases and job discrimination cases. Those were his specialties. And he was really very good at both of them. And some of those job cases he handled, they were just heartbreaking. My office was right next to him, and I would hear these grown men 60 years old break down in there because they'd been unjustly fired, and he would win a great number of those cases. One funny thing, and I won't name the lawyer, but he was also my classmate at Vanderbilt who was a partner in Bass, Berry and Sims. Charlie won this big discrimination case, and Judge Wiseman had awarded him a huge fee. And the lawyer jumped up and said, "Well, that's more than I charged." And Charlie says, "So?"
Could you describe Charlie? Charlie's not with us anymore, and so we can't set him in front of the camera, but suffice it to say, Charlie was a character and had a distinct appearance that went along with that personality.
Charlie was, I would say he was 5'6", although if he was an athlete, his program height he listed probably as 5'9". And he weighed 280 pounds. And he grew up as an only child on a farm on Highway 31 up in Franklin, Kentucky. And he was totally, in many ways, self-made. He worked at the airport as a baggage handler to pay his way through Vanderbilt Law School. And he was just a great guy. We had an enormous amount of fun together. A lot of the stories I can't tell you, maybe off the record. But he was a fine lawyer, and he worked hard. Of course, it's like everything. I mean, if you understand what you're doing and you work hard, I mean, that goes with any job, really. But he was outstanding, and working with him was such fun. I mean, we had some big trials together, and we ran the streets together and did a lot of crazy things together. But the one story that I can tell you that I just always causes me a chuckle is we had this trial in front of L. Clore Morton in Cookeville.
Before you go
Okay.
ahead, describe a little bit briefly about L. Clore Morton, federal judge.
Sure. Well, L. Clore Morton had left East Tennessee, and when he got to Nashville, his application to the Belmead Country Club was rejected, which he felt was a slap in his wife's face, and he adored his wife. And so he didn't want to stay in Nashville. The reason it happened was totally ridiculous. He took over, a lot of times in federal court, at least in my experience over the years, when a new judge comes in, the other judges dump cases on him that they're tired of, they don't want, and so the new guy gets these cases. Well, in this case, it was the school discrimination case that had been going on for years and years. It's like 12 or 14 years. And that got dumped on him, man. But because of that, these racists barred him from the country club. So he said, "I'm not going to live in Nashville and work in Nashville." And there's a courthouse in Cookeville, and he took his whole docket up, and his court officers and probation people and all the people that worked with, and ran it out of Cookeville.
This is a federal courthouse.
Federal courthouse in Cookeville. Yeah. Well, you know, that's also, there's one in Jackson. There's quite a few in Tennessee, because for 50 years, the Democrats held all of the statewide political offices, and they funded all these courthouses. And so we have 5 or 6 federal courthouses in a relatively small state. But he was a terror on the bench. I mean, he ran his court from like 9 in the morning till 3:30, but he got a full day's work in there. And he had a lot of rules, like if you put a character witness on, you were only allowed to ask 3 questions. Their identity, what position they had socially or employment-wise, and what was their opinion, good or bad, of this person. Now, he did things. It was like you had to follow his rules. So, we were in this major trial. The defendant had been a Morehead scholar at the University of North Carolina. He had these. His father had come through Ellis Island as an immigrant and made a fortune putting these huge petroleum tanks in the ground at airports as the industry kept growing and growing. And he was in a mail fraud, insurance fraud trial because a lot of his equipment, things that cost $50,000, bulldozers and things, went missing. And he filed insurance claims, and then later they found the equipment. and so the trial was just, it was a tough trial. Aaron Wyckoff was the lead defense counsel, and he was a wonderful lawyer, and he did a good job. But at the end of the day, Judge Morton was totally different. He was a gracious host. He invited Charlie and I back to his office to have some coffee, and this particular day he said, "Well, I guess I was mighty hard on you boys today." And Charlie just looked at him. At the time, we both weighed about 280 pounds. And Charlie just looked at him, said, "Judge, Lenahan and I got more ass than you got teeth."
What was his response?
He smiled, and he didn't bat an eye, and we just kept right on visiting and drinking coffee. He was totally different off the bench. He was a tyrant in court, which didn't really bother me. It just, you had to stay on your toes.
Well, I remember Charlie, and Charlie had a reputation he kind of cultivated as being a political bomb thrower. He liked to pretend he was a real left-winger and liked to rattle the cage like his partner George Barrett. And in keeping with that, I noticed the tie that you have on with the hammer and sickle and the Cyrillic writing, the red. It looks like something Charlie might wear to provoke somebody into some kind of response.
Well, this is one of my two favorite ties I've ever had. And I actually used it twice in cases as part of my theme to the jury and during the voir dire. And that was that everything is not what it appears. And I used this tie, and I wouldn't tell the jury the punchline until my final argument. But during the voir dire, I'd bring up the tie. And, everybody, at least back then, because there was a lot of phobia about Russia, everybody knew that this was Russian. The colors, the hammer and sickle, the whole thing. So, and I have this tie through the early stages of detente and the supposed change of the Soviet Union and all the way up to the present day. And but in the end, as part of my argument, I would explain to the jury that things aren't always as they seem, because this is a Beatles tie from back in the USSR. That's what the label says. So it was a good argument. It was effective. But I liked the tie anyway. This is the first time I've worn a tie in 3 years. Retirement is really tough.
Well, it's wearing well on you, it would appear.
Yeah.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned another lawyer that you worked with over the years, a fellow by the name of Bill Reddick.
Oh, yeah. Bill Reddick was another wonderful guy like Charlie. He was a death penalty lawyer primarily, especially maybe the last 25 years of his practice. He passed away 3 years ago. He was a tremendous lawyer. And as you know, the death penalty cases, it takes a special person to handle those because they are complicated. They're, in our society, looked down upon, really. And they last a long time, and the opportunity for success is minimal. And he was a great lawyer. But he also was a wonderful guy. I played football against him in high school, and I went to Father Ryan. He went to BGA. And we rode motorcycles together for years and years. And we went out together a lot. We both liked music, and there's lots of great music around here, as you know, to go out and see.
Did you do some coaching with him?
Well, I did. I coached the women's rugby team for 2 years.
Which one?
The Vanderbilt and Nashville, they merged because we needed the Nashville women that were older and generally tended to be larger and very athletic, and the co-eds were co-eds, and although some of them were aggressive, most of them were not. They'd run across the field and just tap somebody on the shoulder. Most guys, if they ran across the field to get somebody, they would try to kill them when they got there. But coaching the women was a lot. I grew up with a great mom and 5 little sisters, and I think I get along well with women. I also had a co-ed volleyball team that was really good, and I was in a co-ed water polo team at the Y. So, and all my sisters were athletic. A couple of them played basketball at the University of Kentucky, and one has a 10th degree black belt in karate. We all like athletics in my family. So.
At some point, you became involved in politics as a candidate, I think in 1982. Is that right?
Well, the first thing that I did was I was Walter Kurtz's campaign manager when he ran for the Metro Public Defender office. And Jim Havern was the Metro Public Defender. But Jim was not really a trial lawyer, and the job got more and more complicated. They now today have over 200,000 cases a year. And back then it had grown to over 30,000, if I remember, cases a year. And Jim, he just couldn't cope with it. And he even thanked me afterwards because he went into a very successful real estate practice and did quite well for himself. He just was overwhelmed by both the courtroom growth and the supervision. It's amazing how much the system grew during my career. When I joined the Federal Defender Office in '92, I was the 13th employee, including lawyers and staff. Now they have 57 employees. I mean, that's a huge growth. And but I think that's one of the things I'm proudest of is Walter turned out to be a great public defender, and he went on to be a good judge, and he set the pace, and every Metro public defender since then has been excellent. And I feel like I really started that by being his campaign manager.
I think I got ahead of myself. That would have been 1978, as I recall. Is that...
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that sounds right.
I think I had something to do with some of those campaigns during that time.
I lose track of time.
But in 1982, you became a candidate yourself.
Yeah.
For what office?
For a criminal court judgeship. And I ran against A.A. Birch.
A.A. Birch.
A.A. Birch. AA was what everybody called him. Adolfo Birch. And I couldn't quite beat him. He was an incumbent. You know, one of the problems that I think still exists is most of our judges, they get appointed to the bench when somebody retires. And then when they run for re-election, they're an incumbent, and they have a great deal of name recognition. And unless they somehow have really been stupid enough to mess up, they're going to have a huge advantage in any sort of election against somebody challenging them. But I couldn't quite beat him, and I really wish I'd have been a little more nasty during my campaign. But Judge Birch and I had a little bit of a history, nothing that unusual, but he was once married to the daughter of a assistant police chief, and I represented her against him in a divorce. I mean, we were just on kind of different sides along the way.
Was that the end of your active political career?
Yeah, you know, I really didn't like that whole process, and there were some things that happened during the campaign that were betrayals, and I don't like that. I mean, if somebody is going to be against me or have an issue with me, that's fine, but they just need to be honest about it. And I don't like backstabbing and a lot of things that they just are part of politics, especially local politics. And I had some people that I thought were friends of mine that didn't help me, and some, not too many, but who helped him.
At some point, I think you mentioned maybe it was 1993, we left private practice and went to work with the Federal Public Defender's Office.
That was in the fall of '92. My children were grown. I'd paid their way through college, and I had a lot of things that I didn't have to pay for anymore. And I gave up my private practice, which saved me a lot of money. Larry Ashworth was the best partner I ever had, but we never could get our overhead below $5,000 a month. And there are just months you don't make any money. And so when I joined the Federal Defender Office, it was at a salary that was only half of what I eventually made over the years. There were step raises up until when the recession hit about 8 years ago. We'd get maybe a 3% raise every year. But it was a good thing for me to do because I got to just try cases. Henry Martin runs a great office. When I was in private practice in a small firm or solo practice, if you need an investigation, if you needed an expert, if you needed something else, it was going to come out of your pocket and your client's pocket. In the Federal Defender Office, we had a whole team of investigators. We had access to every research. We had clerks. Henry was a genius about working the federal budget, so we had everything that we needed. And the people I worked with were just all, just top-notch lawyers, and that was a good thing that I did. And another good thing about it, I didn't realize the value of all the benefits that have helped me since I retired. And that was, I didn't really, I mean, I knew about the benefits. I mean, the obvious one is I have this government Blue Cross Blue Shield. And when I had some problems with the nerves in my lower legs and the blood flow, my first stay for 3 days, almost 4, the bill was $5,000, and I had to pay $0. So the perks like that I carried over, my IRA, my retirement, it turned out real well for me.
I don't think a lot of people realize that lawyers, when they read about fees that lawyers get in some of these cases, or they charge so much an hour, that the lawyer gets all of that. It's not true, is it?
It's not at all true. As a matter of fact, it's a huge misconception. The number of doctors is basically controlled by the AMA, not necessarily in a nasty way. There might be some arguments against that, but the bottom line is there's only so many hospitals in the country. And to start a hospital up in this day and time, like a Vanderbilt, a Mayo Clinic, anywhere, any of those great hospitals, it can't be done. It would cost billions of dollars. And so there's, in a way, doctors are sort of guaranteed a pretty high income. But lawyers, when I started practicing in Nashville, there were only 800 lawyers, and we mostly had a general practice, except for a couple of bond specialists and tax specialists. We had a huge general practice. And now, the last time I checked, there was over 5,000, and that was some time ago. I mean, and even though Nashville's grown, lawyers don't make that much money, not maybe once you get below the top 20%. There's just not enough money out there to go around. But that's a misconception the public has that I wish the bar could somehow get through. But I don't think they ever will, because people, mostly, they only go to a lawyer when they have to. And problems are a burden to people. And if they have a good life, they just want to raise their kids and take care of their job and their home, and they don't want to have to worry about the legal system, because it's not fun. Until it lands on their doorstep or their nephews or something, then they have to know. And that makes them hard to deal with, frankly, often.
Mm-hmm. What sort of cases did you have to handle at the Federal Public Defender's Office?
Well, for 4 years, I did the Fort Campbell docket, which is a misdemeanor docket primarily, although we occasionally get some sort of kidnapping or felony case to deal with. But it was a misdemeanor docket. That was a lot of fun, but it was a burden, because twice a month I had to get prepared for the docket and leave home at 5:30 in the morning to get up there by 7 o'clock and get on base and get to court. But mostly I handled big felony defenses. From obviously we did a lot of bank robbery and counterfeiting and things that were both state and federal offenses, but they take turns. Like whoever has the highest punishment seems to get most of those cases. They'll go federal. At the time, bank robbery was punished much more seriously by the feds than state court. So a lot of the bank robbery cases went there. They could have gone either place. But I had some real fascinating cases. I had a case that started out with these Iranian defendants who the DEA thought were running a drug and money laundering scheme. And the case ended up lasting about forever, for years. And it turned out that except for the two top defendants, there were 9 defendants. I represented the caboose, the last one. Except for the top 2 defendants, nobody really had done anything that incriminating. The government thought it was this massive scheme, and really all that it was a bunch of foreign-born U.S. citizens who had 5 car lots that they were selling cars off of. And on one of them, they had this big trailer that was air-conditioned. And you could hear them. I had to listen to 5,382 tapes. That's the thing about these cases in federal court. Some of them were massive Can you imagine? I had that many taped in Farsi. I mean, I had to have an interpreter almost every day for off and on for 3 years. And my guy got time served for the time that he'd been incarcerated before I got him out, which was about a month or something, when he was originally arrested. So I came out real good in it, and everybody but the top two did. But it was interesting because on all those audio tapes that they had, you could hear these guys, they were sucking hash smoke through a hookah. And you could hear it, and they were in there. And of course, what they were talking about, what guys always do when they're playing cards or something, women and drugs and just whatever, you know, jobs and cars and they hit those pipes. It was really sort of comical, but I mean, they spent $2.5 million on that case.
The feds.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Now, you appeared some in front of Judge Higgins, I think.
Oh yes.
You had a lot in common. You're both Father Ryan graduates.
We're Father Ryan graduates. Our sons went to Father Ryan together, same class. He lived next door forever and ever to my longtime rugby coach. Coach Barrett was from England. He was in charge of the anesthesia department at St. Thomas or Vanderbilt, I forget. I think Vanderbilt. But I knew him a lot of ways. Also, as a private attorney, he helped us get our rugby field in Centennial Park. Tom Higgins was an extremely smart, hard-working individual, and he found a way because we had to have beer at the field. I mean, that's part of the rugby. To have kegs of beer or whatever party. You have to give the visiting team a good party afterwards. So he found a way to get that field okay in Centennial Park that we used for years. Now they have one on private land with 7 fields out off Murfreesboro Road. But
I was being facetious when I said you had a lot in common, and you do, but your personalities are somewhat different, I would say.
Oh yeah. Judge Higgins was so straight, and I would describe myself. I'm not bent, but I'm not that straight either. And for instance, we were in this big trial. Of course, it was set on Saturday for motions. If you ever filed a lot of motions, that Higgins would set the case on Saturday. He never would admit it, but it would sort of punish you. And I told him, I said, Judge, this is fine with me because I already worked the other 6 days. So I've got Saturday open because I always worked on Sunday. So he used to tease me about my earring, you know. And Pat Lavarini, who was his courtroom deputy, her kids and mine went together in grade school and high school. I've known Pat forever. And one day she was standing next to Judge Higgins, and he was teasing me about my earring. And he said maybe you wouldn't have that problem with your knees if maybe you're off balance. And I said, Judge, I thought about that. I think I'm going to get another earring for this side so I balance myself. And then I said, but you know, Judge, the demographics of this earring are not to appeal to a 70-year-old white federal judge. And Pat, he just looked at me. You know, Pat starts laughing because she knew it was more to appeal to the female side of the race than to Judge Higgins's. And we're in this trial, and it's going on all day Saturday. There's 7 defendants. Henry Hale has a defendant, and he stands up, and he starts to spiel, and the judge interrupts him and said, well, isn't that more like this? And Henry said, no, sir. It's sort of like what Bart Simpson would say. And Judge Higgins, he starts flipping through his notes and seeing that he didn't write down a witness's name or a reference. And And Henry sees him doing it and knows he'd never figure out who Bart Simpson was, although almost everybody in America knew who Bart Simpson was. And so Henry says, "Never mind, Your Honor," and he just sits down. But I was never disrespectful of Judge Higgins, and he was not of me. And he was a good judge. But you know, another time it was really funny. Kirk Loggins, who was the reporter for the Tennessean covering the courts, he and I were sitting in this case, and it involved all this porn stuff and these naked dancers, and this former Metro detective was on the stand, and the testimony was there were sexual descriptions of sexual encounters and of this detective being naked in this dance place, and all kinds of just things. And Judge Higgins would look over there from time to time, and Kirk said, "He didn't know what they're talking about." But he was a good judge, a great judge, and he was nice too. I didn't, you know, but we were sort of different.
I think anybody that knows the two of you will recognize that it was kind of oil and water. Well, we're getting close to finishing up here. Is there anything you'd like that I forgot to ask you, or any area that I've missed, or episode or instance you want to cover or mention?
No, I think that you've done a good job covering everything. I appreciate the opportunity just to be here and say stuff. I think I've mentioned some of the things that meant the most to me in my practice, helping people, getting Walter Kurtz elected, some of the people that weren't maybe to be represented, they couldn't afford to be represented. And, you know, like I mentioned, I sued State Farm for $25 for this little black woman. She was in that place across from 3rd and Lindsley that used to be a Third National Bank. And this guy backed into her car. And it was just a tiny thing, but the car was like a 1953 Chevy or something. I mean, you know, it was in mint condition. It was the only car she'd ever had. And State Farm wouldn't pay it. So we're trying the little case in General Sessions, and the guy's on the stand, and the judge is getting madder and madder. And all of a sudden the judge interrupts me and asks the guy, he said, why didn't this get paid? He didn't bring up insurance, you know, of course, and the guy says, "Judge, I don't know. I told State Farm I backed into the lady and to pay it." But of course they had a practice. A lot of those insurance companies are turning down a lot of claims that go away if the people, you know, have a small claim. They know a great number of them will go away if they just stonewall them. It happens.
Yeah. Looking back on all the types of things you've done over your career, you find it to have been a satisfying career?
Yes, it's been very satisfying, especially since I really didn't know what I was doing when I started. I didn't know a single lawyer when I went to law school. Of course, probably the first lawyer just about that I ever met was Thomas Higgins, actually, just because our kids. But I just didn't know a lawyer. I didn't have any background in that, and it appealed to me. And as I mentioned earlier, it was sort of a scheme of my former mother-in-law to get me to go to law school. And I think the main thing is I helped people, and in all of the jobs, that's where I got the most satisfaction. You can't always help, and you can't always win. You can't always reach what you think is a successful outcome, but that's true of everything, really.
Thank you. And
Sure.
with that, I think we'll conclude.
All right, and thanks again. This has been nice.
This marks the end of disc number 1. This concludes the video retirement log of Attorney Jude T. Lenahan. We are off the record at 2:47 p.m.
An hour and 10 minutes.